We're going to make an adorable rainy day ducky. Welcome to Up All Night DIY. I'm Monica. Thanks for joining me. I'm hanging with my girls, Dawn of Shabby Meets Bling and Jody of Jody at Southern Seasons. Together, we're hosting the Can't Sleep Creations Spring and Easter Collaboration. We're joined by lots of our talented friends, so please be sure to check out the playlist as well as Dawn and Jody's channels. Links will be in the description box. Right, let's get into it. For this project, we'll need a 2.3 and a 2.8 foam ball. I got mine at the Dollar Tree. I'm also going to use half of a 2.8 inch foam ball for his umbrella. I just cut this with a serrated knife. You'll need some Model Magic or any clay of your choice. And I'll be using a 4-inch wood disc and a skewer. I'm also going to be using a variety of acrylic paints in different colors and also be using different mediums, which I'll mention as we go along. They'll also be in my supply list in the description box. First things first, we're going to grab a handful of clay and knead it to condition it. So we want to do this for a couple minutes. Then I'm going to add some yellow paint to it, and we're just going to fold that up and knead it to blend the paint with the clay. This paint is the My Studio Bright Yellow. I think it's Michael's brand, like their house brand. It's one of the cheaper paints, so I prefer to use the less expensive paints to mix in with the clay. I generally don't use a whole lot of yellow, so I just grabbed whatever the shop had available. You feel me? Something to keep in mind is that because you're mixing your paint with white clay, your color is going to be a shade lighter, than the original paint color. Also, adding paint to this clay will make it a little sticky, so I'm going to let this sit for about 10 minutes. That usually helps it settle. I'm going to use my acrylic roller to roll my clay nice and flat. I want enough to cover both foam balls. Look how much softer of a yellow this is compared to the paint color. Now I'm going to wrap my foam ball with the clay. I'll cut off any excess, that just makes it easier to handle, and then I'll use bits and pieces of it to fill in any blank spots. I'll roll the ball around on the table to smooth the clay. I'm going to repeat this process on the smaller ball. Our duck is going to need a tail, so I'm going to grab a handful of clay and roll it into a ball. I'll shape it, flattening one side and forming a wee hill, kind of bell-shaped, I guess. And I'm just going to flatten out the end, so it looks like a ducktail. We're going to push that onto the larger ball and just kind of form it with our fingers. And I'm going to roll over the seams to incorporate it with the rest of the clay. And we're going to turn up the end, creating a slight arch to form the classic ducktail. I've cut a small piece of the skewer, and we're going to push that into the body and then attach the head to the body via that skewer. You know what I'm saying? So I want to make sure that I get this at the right angle. I'm rolling out a small cane of clay, which I'm going to use to fill the gap between the head and the body, and then we're going to incorporate that by rolling over the seams, just like we did with the tail. This is going to get covered up later by a bow, but I'm going to try to make it look as neat as possible anyway, just so that the bow lays nice and flat. To create his wings, I'm going to roll another ball of clay and cut it in half. This is going to give me two ovals that should be around the same size. I think these will be the perfect shape for his wings, so I'm just going to leave them just as they are. I'll use this wee brush tool. It's a stiff brush to add some texture to my wee ducky. Just tapping it at different angles to add little dimples. I thought this would add some interest, some texture, and I'm going to do this to the wings as well. I cut a toothpick in half to anchor his wings. I'm going to put one section of it up at the top of his wing and then add one piece at the bottom. And I'm going to do this on the other side as well. Roll in another thin cane of clay, and I'm going to cut this into 3 pieces, give them a little twist, and add them to the top of his head to give him a little tuft of hair, a little quiff. So push that into place, And I'm going to use the handle of my tool to roll over the seams to make sure that it's well stuck. To create his bell, I'm going to take a wee bit of clay and mix in some Americana Warm Sunset. This is a lovely warm orange color, and we're going to incorporate this the same way we did with the yellow paint. Once again, I'm going to roll a small ball, and we're going to make another little hill shape, flattening the one side, kind of like we did with his tail, but I'm going to shape it to look like a duck's bill. Okay, so I'm going to place that where I want it to go, and I'll fuss with it a little bit, kind of shape it out a wee bit more, and do this until I'm happy with it. Again, rolling over the seams to make sure it's well incorporated and really stuck on there. Okay, so before I add the bottom of his bell, I rolled another small ball of yellow clay. I'm going to cut that in half for his cheeks. I'm going to place those on either side of the top section of his bell and incorporate them. He'll need dimples, so we're going to do that by pushing this ball tool up into the bottom of his cheeks. You guys know the deal. See? Sweet wee dimples. Now let's add the bottom of his bell. I flattened a wee bit of the orange clay, and now I'm going to attach it to the bottom, and we're going to curve it down so that it looks like his mouth's open, kind of like he's mid-quack. Once we get that incorporated on there, we're going to set him aside to dry overnight. Meanwhile, let's work on his boots and his umbrella. I'm rolling a thick cane of clay, and I'm using the white clay here. We're just going to paint this up later. I'm going to push the ends onto the table to flatten them a bit, and then we're going to cut that in half. And we're going to roll each half again to lengthen it. I want them to be, approximately the same length, obviously. Okay, we're going to put a little bend in each one to form the boot. And I'm going to square off the toes a wee bit, to make it look more like a webbed foot would fit in there. I've got a couple more pieces of skewer that I'm going to push down into the top of the boots. These are going to be our ducky's legs. To make his umbrella, I flattened some of the white clay, and we're going to cover the half foam ball with this. We'll trim the excess and roll it around on the table to smooth it, and then I'm going to cut out a circle from the clay to add to the bottom. I'm using a jar lid here as my cutter, my cookie cutter, and we'll incorporate that. Press it into place, make sure it's well stuck. I rolled out another thin cane of clay, which I'm going to use to decorate his umbrella. We're going to trim along the bottom edge with this, and then we're going to use it to divide the umbrella into 4 sections. I'm going to try to get this as even as possible, but this is a cartoony kind of character, so if it's off a wee bit, no biggie, right? We're going to set these pieces aside along with the ducky to dry overnight. Now that the ducky's dry, let's get some eyes on them. I'm going to start out painting them with Americana White paint, and I'll give them 2 coats. I know I've mentioned this before, but when I'm doing eyes like this, I just try to consider them as capital D's on their back, and that helps me keep them even. Sometimes they're a little cockeyed, but it's still easier that way for me. Using the back part of a paintbrush handle, I'm going to add a Hippo gray dot right in the center there, and this will serve as an outline for the rest of his eye. Once that dot is fully dry, I'm going to come in with a slightly smaller dowel and add a Ceramcoat Tropic Bay blue dot so that just a little bit of the gray shows underneath at the bottom of the eye there. See what I mean? Now that they're dry, we're going to come back in with an even smaller dot of Hippo gray and go right over top of the Tropic Bay blue. So now we have a layer. This can be easier than trying to get, an even line of the blue and the gray underneath it. This is just a much easier way to do it. Now we're going to come in and give each eye a white highlight. We're going to add some shading, so I pulled out my FolkArt floating medium. I'm using a small flat brush. I'll get a healthy coat of the medium onto the bristles, and then I'm going to side load with Calypso orange by scooping up some of the paint onto the corner of my brush. I'll stroke it on my plate to load the bristles. This will give us a gradient of color from dark to light. With the paint corner of my brush where I want the darkest shadow, right here at the corner of his eye, I'm going to float my shading right around his eyes. I'll relieve my brush with both paint and medium as needed. He looks a little crazy now, but I promise he gets better. Right, so I think I'm going to shade right here along the top of his bill. And a little underneath too. Around the quiff of his hair. Let's add some around his wings and around his tail. I didn't realize until the next day that I didn't incorporate his wings, so you can kind of see that they're a separate piece, but you know what? I'm rolling with it. Just a little bit across his wee bum. And I think that should be good for now. With Hippo Gray and my detail brush, I'm going to outline his eyes. I'm trying to keep this line as thin and even as possible. Now he's going to get some Lala lashes and of course some eyebrows. I'm trying to think of a good name for him. What do you think of Quacker Jack? I don't know, he kind of looks like a Quacker Jack to me. Now let's add some dry brushing with Warm Sunset. I'll pick up some of the paint onto my brush and then offload the majority of it onto a paper towel so that there's just a hint of the paint left on the bristles. I'm going to add some of the color to his cheeks, so I'm just going to dry brush this until I'm happy with the depth of color. Let's add some to his bill, and I'm going to focus on the inside of his bill too, because I think it would be naturally dark there. We'll dry brush here and there with the Warm Sunset before switching to Americana's Sunset Gold, which is a dark yellow color, just to add a little more dimension. I'll add a couple of coats of Warm Sunset to the skewers, his legs, so that they match his bill. His boots and his umbrella will get 2 coats of Hippo Gray. However, I am going to leave the trim on the umbrella white for now, and then we're going to go over it with some white paint just to brighten it up a bit. The boots will have white soles, and they're also going to get a white stripe around the top. Using white again, we're going to add some dip dot flowers to his boots and his umbrella. So I'm just doing 4 dots stacked on top of one another, kind of 2 side by side and then 2 underneath. Each flower will get a bright yellow dot in the center. This is the same paint that I used to mix in with the clay. I'll float in some shading with charcoal gray around the sections of the umbrella and at the top and bottom of the boots. Before we assemble, we're going to add a top coat of DecoArt multi-purpose sealer, pantsing it on with the cosmetic sponge. So each clay piece will get a top coat of this. I painted the wood desk with 2 coats of Tropic Bay Blue, and I'm going to float around the edge of it with Ceramcoat Velvet Teal. I want this to look like he's stamping in a puddle. So I laid my brush the exact same way as I did when I floated the duck. So once I float the edges, I'm also going to give the center a couple of rings, kind of, to mimic how a puddle would ripple. Also, just to give you a heads up, I did this off camera after I assembled him. I added a ring of hot glue around the edge, again to give it like a 3D element, and I did a little around his boots too. I think it turned out really cute, really kind of gives the impression of water. I've cut a length of black and white gingham ribbon that I'm going to wrap around his neck, and I'm just going to hot glue that into place. I painted the skewer drizzle gray and cut the pointy part off, which we're going to use for the top of the umbrella. So I'm just going to push it into the top, and then I'll pull it out, add a lot of hot glue to make sure that it's secure. Let's add his legs. I've already pushed them into place to make the holes, and now we're going to add some hot glue before we permanently affix them. I position his one foot at an angle so that it looks like he's walking, and the other one will just be flat. I'm going to use both fabric glue and a little bit of hot glue to attach him to his puddle. I'll make a wee bow to attach to the ribbon on his neck. I also pushed the long end of the skewer into the bottom of the umbrella. That'll be the handle of the umbrella. So a dab of hot glue, we'll get that ribbon into place, and then we're going to glue his umbrella into place. I've already pushed a hole into his wing where I want the umbrella to go. We'll add a little hot glue, push that umbrella in there, and our wee rainy day duck is done. Quackerjack. Let's take a final look. Aw, here he is, loving playing in the rain and splashing in those puddles. I hope you liked today's projects. Please let me know what you thought. Leave a comment. I want to thank Dawn and Jody for co-hosting. Please be sure to check out their channels, and please be sure to watch the playlist. We have lots of fabulous, talented creators with lots of fun spring and Easter projects. You'll find a link to Dawn and Jody's channels, as well as the playlist, in the description box, along with a list of my supplies. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and all that good stuff. Stay creative, my friends. Thanks for hanging with me. See you next time. Up all night with Monica.